as Mike said, back in the last year, we issued, or the Home Office issued a consultation, and that went out to industry-wide. It went out to everyone. The BSIA, as a result of the Home Office consultation, decided that we would put together a consultation of our own, and a survey with our own members. And that's really what I'm going to do here in the first part of the presentation, is just talk through some of the feedback from the survey that we completed. We did provide a very detailed analysis back to the Home Office as a result of the survey we completed, and that was accepted by the Home Office, and as Mike referred to earlier, they have taken that as a special case and they're looking at that individually. So that's a good result for our members. In addition to that, we also know that a number of our members responded separately to the survey. So there was a vast input from across the BSIA. So if we look at some of the responses and where they came from, we actually we had responses from every sector affected by licensing. So that meant we were able to represent a wide sector of the audience. We had small, medium and large businesses responding. Excuse me. We had representation amongst the members that responded of employees of 158,000 people, of which 92,000 were licensable employees. So again, a huge representation from the industry, from our members, as to what was who we were responding on behalf of. And in addition to that, we actually achieved recognition of the survey from members across the whole of the UK. So it wasn't just England, it was right the way across the UK. So, looking at some of the questions, and what I've done here, I've just pulled out some of the key questions. Agreement with the government's preferred option, which is the phased transition. Now, generally, the members were in favour, as you can see there, 64%. But there was still a proportion, a significant proportion of members who were not necessarily in agreement with the phased transition, or actually putting together a regulation. And as to the criteria, was there any conditions missing? Overall, members were supportive of the areas that were identified in the Home Office consultation. However, they did pick out a few key areas that they felt were missing. They wanted more rigour around the financial checks. They felt that they weren't necessarily strong enough for business regulation. Particularly around some of the leisure industry sectors where there's propensity to go and pay cash in hand in some areas. Checks of businesses. They felt that if they were deemed unsuitable by the police, as they are under ACS conditions, that should be included in this as well. Full investigations into illegal practices. If there are complaints of illegal practices, there should be a more rigorous process supporting the complaints procedure and the subsequent investigations. And as for the complaint system itself, it should be independent. So it should sit outside of the regulatory body. In-house security. It's always been a contentious issue for the contracted industry. Why isn't it included within the regulation? There's a resounding support for in-house security to be included. I think that's probably further down the line, but that's one that from a member's perspective we were very keen to see being brought on board. Should there be a special case for micro businesses? We know the government's got an agenda around red tape, micro businesses, not increasing the burden on micro businesses. But there was a feeling that actually, if we made a special case for micro businesses under this regulation, that we'd create a two-tier system. And if we create a two-tier system, you take away some of the credibility behind that system, and therefore the perception of the public and end users reduces. Should we transfer the ACS hallmark to the industry? It's been mooted by the SIA that in future we should be looking, or they should be looking to transfer responsibility for elements of the hallmark, or the ACS scheme as it is currently, to industry. There was a strong support for that, but again, you can see from that, not everyone's in favour of it. There's still a mixed reception there. But I think, you know, if we move forward, then we should be looking to take responsibility for some of those elements ourselves. But the concerns that were raised were related to cost. If we put more burden in by transferring some of that across to industry, is there going to be an additional cost? Is there going to be an additional standard that we've got to pay for in order to achieve that? And cost, as we all know at the moment, is a critical factor. This was an interesting one. Should individual companies be responsible for issuing licences? And there was a wide response around this, but 90% in favour of the SIA keeping responsibility. And most of the concern was raised around fraudulent activity. People issuing fraudulent cards, different types of cards, different standards, the ability to transfer employees from one company to another, having to reissue those licences, whereas at the moment, if an SIA licence is in place, it transfers with the individual. So there was a lot of concern there, partly around fraudulent use, partly around cost, because again, if we're reissuing licences every time, there's a cost implication involved. Should fees be based on the size of the business, proportionate to the number of employees? This was our biggest divergent view. We couldn't make our minds up on this. Although it was a majority, it wasn't a massive majority for. And I think it was felt the system does need to reflect fairly across different businesses, different business types, and ensure that the cost implications, common themes throughout, are fairly passed out. The other issue was, should this happen, we need to make sure that we don't increase the fees overall. Because again, the stated aim has always been to maintain the costs of licensing and where possible to reduce it. So we need to be careful that we're not seen to be increasing costs. But there was also significant concern from both the leisure industry, crowd management and close protection around their employment model. Because a lot of companies will have people on the books, but they'll be on a number of people's books because of the way the industry works. So how do you apportion the cost out to those companies? And again, it was just making sure that whatever system comes in is actually deemed to be fair and apportionate across the board. Do you pay employees licence fees? 46% of our members responded and said we pay for the employee's licence. 14% pay for most of their employees, but not all of them. And 32% pay for some, but not the majority. So when that went back in, as a result of our survey, it came across that actually there's a significant chunk of money being used by industry to support individuals and their licence fees. What wasn't asked in the survey was how many companies actually claw some of that money back. And that's becoming very apparent now. And that is a concern because some of the comments being made at the moment by the SIA around licensing seem to include that pot of money for individual licences being transferred across to the business licence supply. So we just need to make sure that we're lobbying on behalf of the members, on behalf of industry, to make sure that we get a fair settlement throughout. What's the biggest benefit? They were the three of the main ones that came out. It's about ensuring that we maintain the professional image that we have achieved over the last few years. Industry has worked extremely hard in conjunction with the government and various other bodies, to ensure that the professionalism of the industry has been raised, to ensure that the perception of the end user has been improved and enhanced as a result of the work that's been done. So what we want to make sure is that as a result of the changes in regulation, we don't actually reduce that perception, reduce the enhanced image that we have. If anything, we want to be looking to improve that over the coming years. This one was very easy. Should we have consistent regulation? Nobody disagreed with that. And that really harks back to the point I just made about ensuring that we have that professionalism of industry going forward. So what I'm going to do now is just move on. That was the key sort of elements of the survey. Not all of the responses. There's not enough time to feed that all back, but it was just some of the key points there. So before I move on and just sort of summarise the way forward as far as the SIA are concerned at the moment, has anyone got any questions around the survey that we conducted and the results we've just talked about?
Trevor, will it be on the BSIA website?
It's not at the moment, but we'll have a look at whether we can do that and we can get through. Any other comments? I'm sure we can make that available through the website as well. Any other questions at all? Okay. So what's happening to the SIA? They're going to continue to regulate the industry across the UK. There's no change in plan around that. They're aiming to continue to reduce criminality within the industry. We all know there's still elements of it out there. It's how we can continue to, again, enhance the professionalism, reduce criminality and drag that forward. They'll still have responsibility for raising standards, setting standards, both in terms of businesses and individuals. So there's a lot that's not changing. Recognising quality service through the ACS scheme. The thing about the ACS scheme is it's there as part of the current legislation. It can't disappear as it stands at the moment. So unless there's further primary legislation later down the line, the ACS scheme will exist in one form or other. And obviously they will continue to work with industry partners and stakeholders to ensure that we deliver regulation that's fit for purpose. So how will the PSI be regulated in future? The government is introducing regulation focused around business licensing, or business regulation, sorry. It's all about ensuring that not just the individuals within the industry are licensed, but the businesses are also regulated, and therefore there's some control over what they do. Individuals will still be licensed. There's still going to be a requirement for minimum training standards, for licenses, CRB checks. All of that remains. And the Home Office and the SIA are working to put in place a new regime by the end of this year, or the mechanisms for that. There's a potential view 1st of April next year will be a sort of go live date for regulation, with the 1st of April 2015 being the offence date. So there is a schedule there, still to be confirmed. So that's, it's not in stone at the moment. There's still work to be done to achieve that. So what's the difference between now and the future? Business regulation. It is about bringing that in. We haven't got it today. Mike referred to the fact earlier that when licensing came in for individuals, the industry was looking for business licensing then. So we're at that point where we thought we were a number of years ago. We need to work to make sure we can take it forward. It's going to be a criminal offence for a business to operate without a license, or without the approval of the SIA. So every one of us here will be impacted by that. Every one of our companies will have a requirement to be approved. The SIA will hold an online register of regulated businesses. We as business will still have a requirement to demonstrate that we meet the standards. We meet those requirements under regulation, because if we don't, we won't be approved. We can't operate. You as individual businesses will also have a requirement to understand and deliver licensing for your individuals, whether that's through an approved third party or whether it's directly through yourselves, depending on the size and scope of your own organisation. So there's quite a bit to do over the coming year, 18 months or so. Individuals, as I've said, will still be required to hold a licence for the designated areas, so there'll still be categories of licence. Yes, the SIA will still hold, as they will with businesses, an online register of individuals. So there's still going to be that central point for companies or end users to go back and check that operatives are licensed. CRB checks, or criminality checks, names just changed, they will still be required through the SIA. An upside, the online renewal process is really starting to take off now within the SIA in terms of delivering technological advances, reducing the or improving the efficiencies of their processes and procedures. And we're seeing that in terms of the timescale for licences to be issued. So all of that's good stuff. So what else will they do? They will continue to set standards for licensing of individuals. They'll apply standards across the industry for qualifications. They'll obviously continue to process the licence applications. That's going to be one of their core functions. We've said about criminality checks, issue of licences. As we indicated in our survey, we're very keen that the SIA retain that responsibility, and it would appear that they're going to. And the online registers, and obviously enforcing the law. The enforcement side, some of the sanctions that maybe the industry would like aren't necessarily available through current legislation. So again, primary legislation may well be required to bring that forward. So what's going to happen to the approved contractor scheme? We've already talked about, both Mike and I, about the investment that the industry has made. Not just the industry though, government, police forces and other organisations have all bought into the concept of the ACS. We now, going forward, with the potential for some of that to be taken into business regulation, some of it to possibly move outside the SIA to an industry body at some point to take that on, we've got to make sure that we retain the credibility of whatever system is in place. It's felt that the current ACS companies will be best placed to move across to business regulation requirements, and the likelihood is that they will move across very smoothly once that comes in. As we said, potential for future voluntary schemes, which may include some elements of hallmark, and new legislation required. There isn't a timetable for new legislation yet. That's still yet to be confirmed. So at the moment, the risk we face is that without that primary legislation, we could end up in a situation where we have phase 1 completed, phase 2 doesn't quite get there. I'm confident that phase 2 will be achieved with primary legislation, but we need to see that timetable in place. So what are we going to do? Well, what we always do as a trade association is we're listening to our members, we're listening to their concerns that they raise. We're going to continue to lobby the government, the Home Office, the SIA, to make sure that we achieve everything that we need to make sure that the regulation is fully fit for purpose. And we'll work closely with industry partners such as the SRA to develop the appropriate response to future proposals. Ultimately, we have to work with all the stakeholders to make sure that we can achieve what's needed for the industry, what's needed, what's wanted wherever possible by our members. Because if we can't achieve that, then ultimately regulation will not be the best thing for industry. We want to have a professional industry, we want to have enhanced perceptions of us as organisations with end users, so that we can sell our services, sell our products across a broad spectrum with confidence in the marketplace that we will be delivering a criminal-free professional service. And we'll obviously continue to provide PR, support and information to members wherever possible. And obviously other people as well, end users, anyone who might be impacted by regulation coming up.